Gaius Julius Caesar was born in Rome in July of 100 BC, during a period when the city was already full of activity, noise, and political tension. His birth did not immediately signal anything unusual. He arrived into a family that was respectable but not particularly powerful at the time. The Julian clan traced its ancestry to old patrician lines, but their influence had faded, leaving them with status but modest means. Caesar's early home was in the Subura district, a crowded and lively part of Rome. The streets were narrow, the buildings close together, and the sounds of Roman life, vendors calling out prices, carts rolling over stone roads, and the noise of public spaces formed the background of his earliest memories. Nothing about this environment was calm, yet Caesar grew up quietly within it. As a boy, Caesar watched Rome more than he participated in it. Children in his neighborhood played games in the open streets, and he joined them occasionally, but much of his time was guided by the expectations of his family. The Julians placed importance on education, discipline, and awareness of civic life. Tutors taught him reading, writing, and the fundamentals of Greek. Lessons were steady and unhurried. Each day introduced him to new ideas about history, myths, laws, and the responsibilities expected of Roman citizens. He absorbed these early teachings patiently, not because he showed unusual brilliance at a young age, but because they formed the foundation of every upper-class Roman upbringing. The city itself also became a sort of teacher. Public speeches, religious ceremonies, and the constant presence of Roman officials offered lessons in authority, power, and public behavior. Caesar observed all of this with the quiet focus of a child who preferred to understand things before acting. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, held minor political roles. These were respectable but not highly influential positions, which meant the family lived comfortably but without extravagance. His mother, Aurelia, was known for her discipline and strong sense of propriety. In their household, order mattered. Expectations were clear. Days followed predictable routines. From his parents, Caesar learned the value of sincerity in public duties and calm in private conduct. His mother, in particular, shaped much of his early character. She managed the household with steady control, guided his education, and instilled in him the idea that discipline was not a burden, but a way of living. During Caesar's early years, Rome was not peaceful. Political factions argued, rivalries deepened, and significant changes were taking place within the Republic. But to Caesar as a child, these conflicts were distant, more heard about than understood. He would have seen large crowds gathering for elections, heard murmurs about conflicts beyond the city, and occasionally watched soldiers marching through the streets. These sights did not yet carry meaning for him. They were simply part of Rome's everyday atmosphere. Still, they shaped the background against which he grew, planting a quiet awareness that public life was unpredictable, fragile, and often contested. Though his family was of noble lineage, their daily life was not lavish. Caesar's early years were marked more by learning than by privilege. He studied literature, learned the stories of Rome's past, and listened to lessons about duty and leadership. But these ideas were introduced without urgency. They were simply the expected elements of a Roman boy's upbringing. He practiced oratory in small steps, learning proper pronunciation and the importance of clear speech. He read works that described the deeds of early Roman heroes. These stories appealed to him, not in a dramatic or imaginative way, but as part of the world he was expected to understand. Although Caesar's childhood was largely calm and structured, small hints of ambition appeared even then. He paid close attention to the behavior of successful men in public life. He noticed how they spoke, how they carried themselves, and how they earned respect. These observations didn't yet form a plan, but they shaped the way he viewed Rome. There was something about the city's constant activity that stirred a sense of possibility. He did not express it openly, but it lived quietly in the background of his early years. By the time Caesar approached the age of 9 or 10, Rome was changing rapidly. The city was becoming more divided. Tensions between political groups were rising, and the Republic was entering a period of increasingly unstable governance. Caesar was still too young to understand the full meaning of these developments, but he sensed the shift. The calm routines of his early childhood were beginning to give way to larger events that would soon reach into his life. He was growing up in a city where ambition and conflict lived side by side. The next stage of his life would introduce him to both. As Julius Caesar entered his teenage years, Rome began shifting into a period of quiet but deepening unrest. The social war broke out in 91 BC, a conflict between Rome and several Italian allies seeking citizenship. For a young Caesar, these events formed a backdrop rather than a personal involvement. He did not participate in the fighting. He simply grew up in a city where change had become part of everyday conversations. The war ended, but the tensions it created lingered. Rome's political atmosphere was becoming increasingly fragile, and the conflict between rival leaders was beginning to shape the direction of the Republic. During these years, Caesar continued his studies. Literature, law, rhetoric, and the traditions of Roman leadership. His tutors reinforced the values of discipline and clarity in speech. He practiced oration in controlled exercises, learning how to build arguments and speak with confidence, though he had no public platform yet. His family life remained steady, but carried more responsibilities as he grew older. He attended religious ceremonies, accompanied elders to civic events, and observed the protocols of Roman society. There was no rush toward a political future. Everything unfolded in small, predictable steps. One factor quietly shaping Caesar's early years was his connection to Gaius Marius, his mother's brother. Marius was a powerful figure, 7 times consul and a reformer who had changed the structure of the Roman army. Caesar, still young, did not interact with Marius in a political sense, but he grew up aware that his family was linked to a man who had played a major role in Rome's affairs. This awareness did not create ambition yet, but it gave him an early sense that public life could transform a person's future. Around 84 BC, Caesar married Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna. This marriage was arranged according to Roman customs, connecting Caesar to a family aligned with the Populares faction, those who supported reforms and broader rights for citizens. Cornelia was young, quiet, and respectful of traditions. Their marriage was steady, and although little is recorded about their early life together, the union placed Caesar more firmly within a political circle that opposed the conservative factions of the Senate. This connection would soon matter, not because of anything Caesar did, but because of a conflict he had no control over. In 82 BC, Lucius Cornelius Sulla seized control of Rome after a civil war and declared himself dictator. Sulla viewed Marius and his allies as dangerous opponents. Because Caesar was related to Marius through his mother and married into Cinna's family, Sulla saw him with suspicion. Caesar, still in his early 20s, had not participated in the political struggles between Marius and Sulla, yet he suddenly found himself facing consequences rooted in family loyalties rather than personal actions. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia. It was not a request, but a command, part of a broader effort to weaken the Marian faction. For the first time in his young life, Caesar made a decision that carried real risk. He refused to divorce Cornelia. His refusal was not loud or dramatic. It was simply a quiet statement of loyalty to his wife and her family. Sulla responded by seizing Caesar's property and placing his life under threat. Caesar left Rome and went into hiding. He moved carefully from one safe location to another, relying on relatives and sympathetic associates. Nothing about this escape was grand or heroic. It was simply a necessary step for survival. Eventually, through the intercession of powerful friends and relatives, including some who were close to Sulla, Caesar's life was spared. Sulla allowed him to return, but did not restore his property or offer forgiveness. According to later accounts, Sulla remarked that he saw many Marii in Caesar, suggesting that he sensed ambition beneath the young man's calm exterior. Whether the remark was truly spoken or not, it reflected how others would later view Caesar's potential. For now, Caesar simply resumed life cautiously, avoiding confrontation. After being allowed to return, Caesar decided to leave Rome for military service in Asia Minor. This was a common path for young Romans, but for him, it also provided distance from the unpredictable politics of the city. He joined the Roman forces under Marcus Minucius Thermus and participated in small campaigns. His tasks were routine: delivering messages, assisting commanders, and observing military discipline. He served quietly, without distinction, learning the structure of command and the expectations of Roman officers. During one mission, Caesar was sent to negotiate with a foreign king. When the meeting became tense, Caesar remained calm and handled the situation without allowing the conflict to escalate. This incident earned him a minor military honor. It was not a dramatic moment, but it revealed something about Caesar's nature, a capacity for steady behavior under pressure. By 78 BC, when Sulla died, Caesar was still young but had already experienced several challenges: family expectations, political danger, loss of property, temporary exile, the first hints of military service. None of these events transformed him instantly. They simply added layers to his understanding of Roman life, its complexities, its dangers, and its opportunities. As Sulla's dictatorship faded, Caesar returned to Rome quietly, ready to begin the next phase of his life in a city that was once again changing. The years ahead would not be marked by sudden rises, but by slow, deliberate steps. When Caesar returned to Rome after Sulla's death in 78 BC, he was still only in his early 20s. The city he came back to was quieter than the one he had fled, but the memory of the dictatorship lingered everywhere, on the streets, in the Senate, and in the families who had lost property or relatives. Caesar walked into this environment without wealth, without political office, and without the protection of powerful patrons. Yet he carried something that would shape the next phase of his life: the freedom to begin again. Caesar did not seek immediate public attention. He lived modestly and stayed aware of how unstable the political climate still was. There was no sudden rise in status, no dramatic plan to regain what he had lost. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his life in small, steady increments. He spent time meeting people quietly, renewing old connections, and observing which political figures were rising now that Sulla's strict controls had loosened. He understood that the Republic was entering a new phase, but moved cautiously, taking note of opportunities without immediately pursuing them. One of the first steps Caesar took was to begin working as an advocate in the courts. Roman legal proceedings were public, often crowded, and a common way for ambitious young men to become known. Caesar approached this work with discipline, preparing carefully for each case. His speeches were noted for their style, calm, clear, and carefully constructed. He spoke with a measured confidence rather than theatrical flair. Observers later recalled his ability to present arguments with clarity and to appeal to reason without raising his voice unnecessarily. He gained attention without seeking it. His early cases did not transform him into a major public figure, but they established a reputation for intelligence and composure. Caesar soon decided to strengthen his skills further. In 75 BC, he traveled to Rhodes to study under Apollonius Molon, a respected teacher of rhetoric who had previously trained Cicero. This decision reflected Caesar's quiet ambition. He wanted to master the art of speaking before stepping into larger roles. The journey showed his willingness to learn, adapt, and refine himself gradually. He did not expect immediate advancement. He was building a foundation. On his way to Rhodes, Caesar's ship was captured by Cilician pirates, common in the eastern Mediterranean at the time. The pirates took him prisoner, expecting ransom. According to later accounts, Caesar handled the situation with unusual calm. He interacted with his captors without fear, maintaining a composed demeanor, even though he was technically their hostage. Eventually, the ransom was paid, and he was released. After his release, he helped organize a small force to pursue the pirates, leading to their capture. The action was taken quietly and efficiently, without grand statements or dramatic gestures. The incident did not elevate him into fame, but it added a layer to his growing reputation. A young Roman who could remain steady under pressure. After the pirate incident, Caesar continued to Rhodes to complete his studies. He spent time refining his rhetorical skills, practicing speech structures, and observing how seasoned orators constructed arguments. His approach remained disciplined and methodical. When he returned to Rome, he brought with him not only improved oratory, but also a reinforced sense of direction. He did not rush into major political positions. Instead, he moved quietly through the lower offices available to young nobles. With Sulla gone and political restrictions easing, Caesar began taking on minor magistracies. He was elected military tribune, a stepping stone role that allowed him to gain administrative and organizational experience. His tasks were routine, managing records, assisting commanders, and performing civic duties. Each office he held was small, but everyone added to his understanding of Rome's institutions. He learned how public funds were managed, how provincial affairs were handled, and how Roman elections were organized. Nothing in this period was dramatic, but each step was deliberate. By the late 70s and into the 60s BC, Caesar was becoming a known figure, not for military victories or bold political moves, but for reliability. People recognized him as someone who spoke well, worked steadily, and handled responsibilities without causing disruption. He had not yet entered the major political arena, but he was building a foundation of respect among those who paid attention to rising young officials. During this period, Caesar lived simply. He was not wealthy, and his earlier loss of property had forced him to be cautious with expenses. He relied partly on family connections and partly on carefully managed income from legal work and public offices. His marriage to Cornelia remained stable until her death in 69 BC. The loss was quiet but significant. She had been a steady presence in his early adulthood, and her death marked the end of one chapter of his personal life. Shortly after, he married Pompeia, a union that reflected both family interests and political alignment. By 69 BC, Caesar had built a small but solid base of experience: service in the courts, minor military roles, administrative work, and education under renowned teachers. Nothing in these years revealed the future general or statesman he would become. Yet everything he did contributed quietly to the foundation on which his later life would stand. He had learned how Rome worked, how people responded to careful persuasion, and how to handle challenges without losing composure. The next stage of his life would place him on a more visible path, one that would carry him toward higher office and slowly toward greater influence. By 69 BC, Julius Caesar had accumulated enough experience to begin stepping into roles that carried more visibility. He was no longer just a young man rebuilding after the sullen years. He had spoken in courts, served in minor offices, and established himself as someone capable of steady administrative work. These were not dramatic achievements, but they provided a meaningful foundation for the next phase of his life. In 69 BC, Caesar achieved his first major public office, quaestor, an administrative and financial role required for anyone who wished to pursue higher political positions. The office did not grant significant power, but it brought structure to his career. As quaestor, Caesar was assigned to Hispania Ulterior, a Roman province on the Iberian Peninsula. His responsibilities included managing finances, assisting provincial governors, and overseeing public funds. It was routine work, but it allowed him to understand provincial administration more closely. He performed his tasks carefully and without unnecessary intervention. The experience taught him how different Rome's provinces were from the capital, and how decisions made in Rome affected people far from the city. That same year, Caesar's wife Cornelia died. Her death marked a quiet but important moment in his life. Cornelia had been part of his early adulthood, connected him to powerful political families, and supported him through difficult years. Her passing left him with a young daughter, Julia, and a sense of personal loss that did not appear dramatically in historical records, but is understood to have affected him deeply. Caesar delivered a funeral oration for Cornelia, an unusual gesture, since women rarely received such honors. The speech was calm, respectful, and noted for its sincerity. It brought him public attention in a modest but noticeable way. When Caesar returned from Hispania after completing his quaestorship, he found that his reputation had grown. People had heard about his clear oratory and his respectful conduct in office. Rome valued such traits, especially during times of political uncertainty. He did not immediately run for higher office. Instead, he spent time renewing connections, strengthening relationships with various political groups, and positioning himself carefully. He aligned himself with the populares, the faction that favored reforms and greater rights for the common people, continuing the path set by his earlier family associations. In 65 BC, Caesar became a aedile, a position that involved maintaining public buildings, organizing festivals, and overseeing city infrastructure. Aediles often gained popularity by funding games or improving public spaces. Although Caesar was not wealthy, he managed to organize elaborate public spectacles, including gladiatorial games and displays honoring his late uncle Marius. These events were not extravagant in a modern sense, but they stood out in Rome and brought Caesar considerable attention. People began to associate him not only with competence, but also with civic generosity. His approach was not flashy, it was deliberate. Each decision carefully strengthened his standing among the people without violating the expectations of his office. In 63 BC, Caesar ran for Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. It was an influential position, responsible for overseeing religious ceremonies and maintaining Rome's sacred traditions. His opponents were older and wealthier, and many observers expected him to lose. But Caesar campaigned quietly and thoroughly. He visited neighborhoods, spoke with ordinary Romans, and offered a calm presence in a political climate that was becoming increasingly tense. To the surprise of many, he won the election. The victory brought him both prestige and a permanent residence in the Forum, a central location that gradually raised his public visibility. Still, he maintained his usual composure, treating the new role as another responsibility rather than a triumph. After winning the office of Pontifex Maximus, Caesar married Pompeia, granddaughter of Sulla. The marriage strengthened his connections within Rome's political world, though little is recorded about their personal relationship. The union was steady, but short-lived. When a scandal arose during a religious festival hosted in their home, the Bonadea trial, Caesar quietly divorced Pompeia, citing the importance of maintaining public trust. He did not accuse her of wrongdoing. He simply stated that the wife of the Pontifex Maximus must be beyond suspicion. The decision demonstrated his awareness of reputation and the value he placed on civic perception. By the late 60s BC, Caesar had served as quaestor, gained experience in a Roman province held, the aedileship become Pontifex Maximus, strengthened political alliances, built modest but meaningful public support. None of these achievements transformed Rome, but each one placed Caesar steadily on the ladder of Roman political advancement. He had become a recognizable figure, known for calm leadership, clear speaking, and careful maneuvering. The next phase of his life would soon connect him to two of Rome's most influential men, Pompey and Crassus, setting the stage for the political alliance that would quietly shift the direction of the Republic. The changes ahead would unfold slowly at first, then more clearly, as Caesar moved closer to the center of power. By 60 BC, Julius Caesar had accumulated enough experience in public office to become a notable figure in Rome, though not yet a dominant one. He had served as quaestor, aedile, and Pontifex Maximus. He was known for his steady demeanor, clear speech, and careful political behavior. Still, he lacked the wealth and military prestige that carried true weight in Roman politics. This was the environment in which Caesar began quietly forming alliances, measured steps that would gradually shift him toward greater influence. The Roman Republic was marked by rivalry between powerful individuals. Two men, in particular, stood out: Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, a celebrated general with significant military victories, land for veterans to distribute, and growing public support. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, with influence across the financial and business sectors. Both men had reasons to feel frustrated. Pompey wanted his veterans settled and his Eastern arrangements ratified. Crassus sought favorable tax concessions for his allies. The Senate, dominated by conservative factions, resisted both. Caesar, still rising and without strong enemies, saw an opportunity for cooperation. Caesar planned to run for consul in 59 BC. Consulship was the highest annually elected office in the Republic and required broad support. He could not succeed alone, not against entrenched senatorial resistance. He approached Pompey and Crassus quietly. Each man agreed to support him, provided that their own political needs would be addressed. The agreement was not formalized in documents or proclaimed publicly. It was simply an understanding among three men who saw mutual benefit. The alliance, later known as the First Triumvirate, was not formed with dramatic ceremonies or public declarations. It grew through conversations, negotiations, and the steady alignment of interests. Caesar provided the political skill, Pompey the military authority, and Crassus the financial resources. Together, they created a balance of influence strong enough to bypass senatorial obstruction. To reinforce the alliance, Caesar arranged a marriage between his daughter Julia and Pompey. Julia was known for her kindness and composure, and the marriage created a personal connection that stabilized the political relationship between the two men. Though the marriage was political in its purpose, it is recorded that Julia and Pompey genuinely cared for each other, providing a rare moment of personal harmony within a political arrangement. With the support of Pompey and Crassus, Caesar won the consulship of 59 BC. Rome had 2 consuls each year, and Caesar's colleague, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, represented the conservative faction. Bibulus attempted to obstruct Caesar's proposals, but Caesar, supported by crowds in the Forum and by his powerful allies, managed to pass key legislation. Land for Pompey's veterans. Financial settlements that aided Crassus's interests. Measures that strengthened Caesar's own position. Bibulus eventually withdrew from public life for the rest of the year, leaving Caesar effectively in control of consular activity. Some joked that the year was not the consulship of Caesar and Bibulus, but simply the consulship of Julius and Caesar. Caesar did not respond to such remarks. He simply continued his work. Caesar's consulship was not marked by personal flamboyance. He preferred predictable routines, proposing laws, negotiating quietly, addressing public assemblies, maintaining alliances. His strength lay in his steadiness, not in dramatic gestures. As his consulship neared its end, Caesar arranged for a significant provincial command. Through legislation, he secured control over Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul. These regions provided him with military authority, loyal legions, and a long-term command that would shape the next phase of his life. This appointment was the most important outcome of his entire year as consul. It placed him in a position where he could build military achievements, something he had not yet done. By the end of 59 BC, Caesar had strengthened ties with Pompey, gained Crassus's financial support, earned public favor, completed a year of legislative efficiency, secured a powerful provincial command. None of this appeared revolutionary at the time. Rome had seen alliances before, but the calm cooperation between 3 influential men created an undercurrent that would shape the Republic's future. Caesar now prepared to leave for Gaul, where the next chapter of his life would unfold far from Rome, quietly at first, then with impact that neither he nor the Republic fully anticipated. When Julius Caesar departed for Gaul in 58 BC, he did so without the fanfare one might expect from a soon-to-be famous general. He left Rome quietly, with the authority of a long provincial command and the backing of his allies. His responsibilities were clear: protect Roman interests, manage relations with tribal confederations, and maintain order in a region where political alliances shifted frequently. What followed became one of the longest and most detailed military campaigns in Roman history, though Caesar approached it not with theatrical ambition, but with steady calculation and a methodical pace. Gaul was not a single unified territory. It consisted of many tribes, each with its own leaders, customs, and internal disputes. Caesar's first task was to understand this landscape, its alliances, its tensions, and the small conflicts that often escalated into larger instability. He did not rush into large battles. His early actions were cautious, aimed at establishing Roman presence and assessing potential threats. One of the first challenges came from the Helvetii, a migrating tribe whose movement risked destabilizing nearby regions. Caesar responded systematically. He met with leaders, evaluated their intentions, and prepared defensive measures long before any major confrontations occurred. The decisions he made were based on gradual assessments, not sudden impulses. The Helvetii intended to move across lands that were of interest to Rome and its allies. Caesar constructed fortifications, controlled crossing points, and followed protocols to ensure negotiations were offered before conflict. Only after talks failed did he engage militarily. The result was a Roman victory, but Caesar described the events in a calm, factual tone in his later writings. He focused on logistics, movements, and observations rather than dramatizing the events. Following the Helvetii, Caesar turned his attention to Ariovistus, a Germanic king who had crossed the Rhine. Caesar approached the situation with the same slow caution. He attempted negotiations first, documented the meetings carefully, and only resorted to military action after diplomacy failed. The encounter reinforced his understanding that Gaul required constant attention, not only to local tribes, but to external groups seeking influence in the region. Over the next several years, Caesar worked through Gaul step by step. He formed alliances with some tribes, subdued others who resisted Roman authority, established winter quarters for his legions, moved methodically to ensure supply lines remained stable. Every campaign season had a rhythm: preparation, movement, engagement, and return. He recorded these cycles in the Gallic War, not as heroic narratives, but as structured accounts of decisions, outcomes, and administrative details. Through these steady efforts, Caesar's command expanded, but always with careful attention to the requirements of Roman governance. Because Caesar held a long-term command, he had the rare opportunity to work with the same legions year after year. This continuity created mutual trust. Soldiers knew his expectations. He understood their strengths. He rewarded achievements, ensured supplies were steady, and spoke to his troops with a measured confidence that reinforced discipline. These practices gradually shaped his legions into one of the most reliable forces in the Roman world. Late in his campaigns, Caesar conducted 2 expeditions across the English Channel to Britain. These ventures were not invasions intended to conquer the island, but exploratory operations designed to assess the region and demonstrate Roman reach. The expeditions were brief and logistical rather than dramatic. They provided information, but did not become major episodes in his rule of Gaul. While Caesar was occupied in Gaul, changes were happening in Rome. His alliance with Pompey and Crassus, though still recognized, had begun to shift. Crassus sought military distinction and later campaigned in the east. Pompey increasingly governed Rome and its surrounding regions. The balance that had created the first triumvirate was slowly changing. News of these developments reached Caesar gradually, often months after events occurred. Still, he remained focused on Gaul, addressing immediate needs before thinking about Rome's future. Toward the end of his command, Caesar faced a significant resistance from a coalition of Gallic tribes led by Vercingetorix. The opposition was organized and deliberate, aiming to push Roman forces out of the region. Caesar responded with the same approach he had used throughout his time in Gaul: careful planning, controlled engagements, and systematic pressure. The campaign required patience and steady leadership through difficult weather, complex logistics, and coordinated tribal strategies. Ultimately, the resistance was subdued. With that, most of Gaul became stable under Roman influence. During these years, Caesar wrote his accounts of the Gallic campaigns. His writing style remained calm and observational. He described troop movements, negotiations, and outcomes without inserting personal emotion or dramatic commentary. These writings served multiple purposes. They documented events for the Senate. They presented Caesar's actions in a clear and orderly manner. They reinforced his competence without boasting. They were neither memoir nor propaganda in the modern sense. simply records written with clarity and restraint. As Caesar's time in Gaul approached its end, tensions in Rome were growing. Pompey had become increasingly aligned with the Senate. Crassus had died in Parthia. Political harmony had faded. Caesar remained aware of these changes, but he did not abandon his responsibilities. He completed his final campaigns, prepared troops for winter quarters, and maintained order until his command contracted the timeline toward legal conclusion. By 50 BC, Caesar had spent nearly a decade in Gaul. It had been a period of slow expansion, routine administration, careful calculations, steady leadership, quiet accumulation of authority. Nothing about this decade was rushed, though its effects were significant. Caesar returned to the borders of Italy with experienced legions, increased influence, and a political situation awaiting him that would not be as orderly as the campaigns he had just concluded. The next chapter in his life would begin with a single crossing, one that changed Rome's history. By 50 BC, Julius Caesar's long command in Gaul was coming to an end. For nearly a decade, he had governed the region calmly and methodically, expanding Roman influence through steady campaigns and careful administration. His legions trusted him, his officers understood his expectations, and his reports to Rome documented everything with a measured hand. But while Gaul had grown more stable, Rome had become less so. The alliance that once connected Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus no longer held its earlier balance. Crassus had died several years earlier in Parthia. Pompey, once Caesar's close ally, had drawn closer to the Senate's conservative faction. With Caesar absent from the city and Pompey increasingly influential within it, tensions accumulated quietly but persistently. As Caesar's command neared its legal expiration, the Senate began discussing his return. They expected him to lay down his military authority before entering Rome. Caesar asked for the ability to stand for consul in absentia, a request that would allow him to keep his legal protections while pursuing political office. The Senate delayed its response. Some supported him, others hesitated. Pompey, having grown more cautious of Caesar's rising influence, supported measures that restricted Caesar's options. Over time, motions were proposed, vetoed, revised, and debated. The discussion stretched on, often producing little clarity. Letters traveled slowly between Rome and Caesar's camp, and each message revealed a city growing more divided. Caesar remained patient, continuing routine matters in Gaul while waiting for a decision. In early 49 BC, the Senate, pressured by Pompey and his faction, issued an order that Caesar must dismiss his legions or be declared an enemy of the state. The decree did not come suddenly. It followed weeks of debate. Yet when it was announced, it removed any chance for gradual negotiation. Caesar received the message while stationed near the Rubicon River, the small boundary that separated his province from Italy proper. Crossing into Italy with his army was illegal. Remaining outside Italy meant surrendering his command and exposing himself to prosecution. He considered the options quietly. There was no recorded dramatic speech, no sudden revelation. The decision emerged from the gradual accumulation of circumstances, political pressure, legal constraints, and the absence of compromise. In January 49 BC, Caesar approached the Rubicon with his legion. The river itself was narrow, calm, and unremarkable. It was simply a geographical line drawn into law, yet it represented the boundary between military authority and civil order. The crossing was not a dramatic event. No battles occurred. The soldiers marched in a steady line, carrying their equipment as they had done countless times before. Caesar rode with them, maintaining the same measured composure he had shown throughout his campaigns. With that crossing, civil war became unavoidable. not because of a single emotional gesture, but because the legal boundaries of Rome no longer allowed for peaceful resolution. News of Caesar's movement reached Rome quickly. The reaction was immediate, but scattered. Pompey, still powerful and well-connected, left the city with several senators, believing it safer to regroup elsewhere. Many citizens, uncertain of what was happening, remained calm but watchful. No battles took place in Rome. No violence erupted. The city shifted quietly from one political reality to another as people waited to see how events would unfold. After crossing the Rubicon, Caesar did not rush toward Rome. He advanced at a controlled pace, securing towns without conflict, restoring order where needed, communicating with local officials, offering peaceful terms to those willing to negotiate. His goal, at this stage, was not conquest, but stability. He wanted to show that he was not entering Italy as an invader, but as someone who believed he had been denied fair political treatment. The legions followed their routines. Camps were built, supplies were organized, movements were measured. By the time Caesar reached Rome, the Senate had already withdrawn. The city was calm. No confrontation took place. Caesar entered, oversaw administrative matters briefly, and then left, aware that the conflict would continue elsewhere. The crossing of the Rubicon did not bring dramatic changes immediately. It simply shifted Rome into a new stage of uncertainty, one that would unfold gradually in the years ahead. This chapter marked a transition, not a climax. Caesar had moved from provincial command into a civil conflict that would require slow, steady campaigns across several regions. The next phase of his life would not be defined by a single river, but by a long series of careful decisions during the civil war that followed. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he did not do so intending immediate conquest. His initial movements in Italy reflected a cautious, organized approach. He advanced slowly, secured towns without force when possible, and avoided actions that might disrupt daily life for ordinary citizens. The civil war that followed unfolded not as a single dramatic event, but as a series of steady campaigns across vast regions. After entering Italy, Caesar found little resistance. Pompey and the senatorial faction withdrew southward, ultimately leaving the peninsula entirely. Caesar moved through Italian cities calmly. He offered leniency to opponents when they surrendered and avoided punitive measures. This approach encouraged further cooperation and minimized unrest. He did not remain long in Rome. Instead, he focused on organizing resources, securing the government treasury, and ensuring stability before continuing his pursuit of Pompey's forces. Rather than chasing Pompey immediately across the sea, Caesar traveled west to confront the senatorial legions stationed in Hispania. This decision was strategic rather than emotional. By securing Spain first, Caesar prevented these experienced legions from joining Pompey later. The campaign involved negotiations, controlled marches, careful positioning of forces, eventual surrenders from commanders who realized resistance was impractical. The conflict in Spain ended without major battles. Caesar returned to Rome, leaving the province more stable than he found it. During his brief return to the capital, Caesar addressed several administrative matters, restoring public order, appointing temporary magistrates, confirming certain laws, ensuring the grain supply. These tasks were not exciting, but they were necessary for maintaining stability while he was away. After completing them, he prepared to follow Pompey, who had moved to Greece. In 48 BC, Caesar crossed the Adriatic to confront Pompey's forces. This stage of the war required navigating logistical challenges, transporting troops, securing supply lines, and coordinating movements across unfamiliar terrain. One of the first major confrontations occurred near Dyrrhachium. Pompey's forces held stronger positions. Caesar attempted to surround them with fortifications, but the effort was complicated by the landscape and resource limitations. When Pompey launched a counterattack, Caesar's troops withdrew in an organized manner, avoiding a larger defeat. Although he did not win at Dyrrhachium, Caesar remained steady in his planning, adjusting his movements without panic. Later in 48 BC, Caesar and Pompey met at Pharsalus. Pompey's army was larger and better supplied, while Caesar's forces were more experienced after years in Gaul. The battle resulted in Caesar's victory. He described the engagement in his writings with his usual restraint, focusing on troop arrangements, the discipline of his soldiers, the orderly retreat of Pompey's cavalry. Pompey fled after the defeat, traveling to Egypt in hopes of securing refuge. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he discovered that Pompey had been killed upon arrival. Caesar did not express triumph. He noted the event with a factual tone. He then became involved in local politics, supporting Cleopatra in a dynastic dispute. His time in Egypt included administrative tasks, negotiations, and efforts to restore stability. Though later accounts emphasize dramatic elements, Caesar approached the situation as part of his broader responsibility to maintain order in regions connected to Rome. After Egypt, Caesar addressed other unresolved matters. Campaigns in Pontus stabilizing Syria, reinforcing Roman authority in Asia Minor. In Pontus, he defeated Pharnaces quickly. The efficiency of the campaign later inspired his brief comment, "I came, I saw, I conquered," though his writings remained otherwise consistent in their low embellishment. In 46 BC, Caesar traveled to North Africa to confront senatorial forces who had regrouped there. The campaign required careful planning due to the unfamiliar geography and supply challenges. The key confrontation at Thapsus ended in Caesar's favor. As in earlier battles, he offered clemency to many opponents afterward, preferring stability over punishment. The last significant opposition came from supporters of Pompey's sons in Hispania. Caesar traveled there in 45 BC. The campaign concluded at Munda, where Caesar's forces prevailed after a lengthy engagement. This marked the end of the civil war. No major factions remained in active resistance. When Caesar returned to Rome, he did so without celebration. He resumed administrative duties, focusing on reorganizing provincial governance, addressing debts, expanding citizenship rights, managing public works, planning long-term reforms. He now held undisputed control, but he did not immediately redefine the structure of the Republic. He continued acting within the forms of Roman office, albeit with increasing authority. By 45 BC, Caesar had become the central figure in Roman political life. His rise had not been sudden. It had unfolded through patient decision-making, steady campaigning, careful administration, consistent leniency, a willingness to negotiate. The Civil War had ended, but the next phase, governance, reform, and the slow buildup of senatorial tensions, was just beginning. The following chapter covers those years, Caesar's reforms, titles, and the gradual unease that emerged in Rome. After the Civil War ended in 45 BC, Julius Caesar returned to a Rome that was quieter, but still unsettled. The years of conflict had disrupted institutions, strained finances, and left many regions of the Republic unstable. Caesar, now the central authority in Roman politics, approached these challenges with steady, methodical steps. He did not attempt sweeping change all at once. Instead, he introduced adjustments gradually, administrative, economic, and civic reforms that reflected his practical approach to governance. One of Caesar's first tasks was to address provincial administration. Many provinces had suffered from corruption, overtaxation, and inconsistent leadership during the civil wars. Caesar reorganized them carefully, appointing new governors, implementing clearer guidelines for provincial conduct, establishing more stable systems of taxation. His aim was not dramatic transformation, but restoring order to areas disrupted by years of conflict. Rome's economy had been strained by wartime borrowing and disrupted trade. Caesar introduced measured financial reforms, adjusting debts to make repayment more manageable, stabilizing interest rates, encouraging the return of property seized or abandoned during the war. None of these measures solved every economic issue, but they eased pressure on many citizens who had been affected by instability. Caesar also initiated construction projects intended to benefit the public and create employment. These included improved public buildings, expanded marketplaces, reorganized forums, drainage, and infrastructure efforts. Many of the projects were long-term in nature. Some would not be completed until after his death. Still, they contributed to a sense of renewed activity in the city. Among Caesar's most lasting reforms was the reorganization of the Roman calendar. The previous system had fallen out of alignment with the seasons, causing confusion in civil and religious scheduling. Working with astronomers, Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, adjusting the length of the year and establishing a clearer cycle of months and leap years. The change did not cause immediate excitement. It was simply a correction that allowed civic life to proceed more predictably. As Caesar governed, the Senate awarded him various titles and privileges. These were often symbolic gestures intended to acknowledge his authority. Over time, however, the accumulation created an atmosphere of unease among certain senators. Caesar received repeated consulships, extended periods of special authority, the title dictator, initially for limited terms and later for a term for life. These changes did not occur abruptly. Each one was granted individually, usually surrounded by formal ceremonies, but together they suggested a shift in the balance of the republic. Caesar himself did not publicly demand these honors. He accepted them calmly, sometimes with reluctance, but their growing number made many senators uncomfortable. Among the people, Caesar remained widely supported. His leniency during the Civil War, public works, and economic reforms earned him goodwill. Crowds attended his appearances, and many viewed him as a stabilizing figure after years of conflict. At the same time, members of the senatorial class watched his increasing authority with concern. They worried that the traditional structures of the republic were being overshadowed by the influence of one individual. The tension did not erupt immediately. It developed slowly, over months and years, as Caesar's role became increasingly central to Rome's functioning. During this period, Caesar's personal life remained stable. He continued to oversee the education and well-being of his grandnephew Octavian, who spent time in his household. Caesar also interacted regularly with close associates, including trusted administrators and military officers. These relationships were quiet and consistent. Caesar valued reliability, and he surrounded himself with individuals who understood the routines of his leadership. As 44 BC approached, subtle signs of growing concern began to appear among senators. Some avoided attending certain meetings. Others spoke cautiously about political matters. Small groups discussed hypothetical scenarios about the future of the Republic. Caesar seemed aware of this unrest, but he continued his work without significant adjustment. He believed his reforms were necessary and that cooperation would eventually stabilize. In early 44 BC, Caesar began preparing for a campaign against Parthia. The campaign was intended to address Rome's defeat at Carrhae years earlier and restore Roman influence in the region. Preparations were routine, gathering supplies, confirming military appointments, discussing logistics with the Senate. There was no urgency. The planning followed the same measured pace as Caesar's earlier work. By the start of 44 BC, Caesar had become the center of Roman governance. His reforms were numerous but orderly. His authority was significant, but presented as necessary for stability. Still, the atmosphere around him had changed. What had begun as administrative necessity now appeared, to some senators, as a concentration of power that threatened traditional structures. Their discomfort grew not from a single action, but from a gradual accumulation of them. The stage was set not for a grand confrontation, but for quiet planning that would unfold behind closed doors. The next chapter reaches the final events of Caesar's life, the Ides of March, and the calm, unsettling aftermath. By early 44th BC, Julius Caesar stood at the center of Roman public life. His reforms had touched nearly every aspect of administration, the economy, and civic organization. His authority was extensive, though much of it had been granted formally by the Senate. Preparations for his upcoming Parthian campaign advanced steadily, with Caesar reviewing logistics and appointments in an orderly fashion. Beneath this routine, however, an undercurrent of unease had been growing among certain senators. Their concern did not stem from any sudden act, but from the slow accumulation of powers Caesar now held. The Republic, in their view, had become dependent on a single leader in a way that felt unfamiliar and uncertain. There were no dramatic public confrontations. Instead, opposition gathered quietly. Senators met privately in small groups, often speaking cautiously and avoiding open declarations. Their discussions centered around the belief that the Republic's traditional balance of power was at risk. Some members were motivated by concern for the Republic, others by personal grievances or fears of fading influence. Gradually, they formed a plan to remove Caesar before he left for the Parthian campaign, believing that once he departed Rome with large forces, his authority might grow even further. The group expanded slowly, each member joining after private conversations rather than organized meetings. Caesar remained largely unaware of these preparations. He continued his normal schedule of administrative work, public appearances, and planning for his forthcoming departure. In the days leading up to the Ides of March, Caesar moved through his routines without noticeable change. He attended Senate sessions, received delegations, reviewed state matters, and worked with officials on pending reforms. He had been warned by certain individuals to exercise caution, though these warnings were vague. Caesar acknowledged them politely, but did not alter his daily habits. He preferred predictable schedules and did not often act on rumors. On the morning of the Ides of March, Caesar left his residence to attend a Senate session at the Theater of Pompey, a temporary meeting place while the usual Senate house was under construction. The path he took was familiar. He traveled with attendants, stopping briefly to speak with individuals who approached him. The meeting was expected to address administrative matters related to the upcoming Parthian campaign. When Caesar entered the Senate chamber, he greeted those present in his usual manner. The senators gathered around him not abruptly, but gradually, as they moved into position to address him with petitions, a common sight in such sessions. The attack began suddenly, but the moment itself was quiet in historical records. The conspirators acted in close quarters, each carrying out a role assigned in earlier discussions. Caesar attempted to defend himself briefly, but was ultimately overcome by the number of attackers. The event lasted only moments. There were no speeches or dramatic declarations, just a brief commotion in a chamber that soon fell silent again. Once the attack ended, the conspirators dispersed. Some believed the people would support their actions. Others feared immediate retaliation. The Senate chamber quickly emptied, leaving the space unusually quiet. Caesar's attendants and supporters, shocked by the suddenness of the event, moved cautiously. Word traveled through Rome at different speeds. People stepped into the streets, unsure of what had occurred or how to respond. The city did not erupt into instant conflict. Instead, it entered a period of uncertainty, marked by quiet discussions, hesitant gatherings, and conflicting messages about what the future would hold. In the days that followed, preparations were made for Caesar's funeral. The ceremony drew large crowds. Many citizens viewed Caesar as a leader who had restored stability after years of civil war. Their presence reflected a mixture of respect, curiosity, and unease about the changing political environment. The funeral passed calmly, though the public response revealed that the conspirators had misjudged how ordinary Romans felt about Caesar's leadership. The conspirators had expected that removing Caesar would restore the Republic's older structure. Instead, the political situation grew more complex. Mark Antony, as consul, took steps to stabilize the government. Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, slowly entered public life, gathering supporters and forming alliances. There was no immediate civil war. Instead, there was a slow unraveling of the conspirators' expectations as the months unfolded. Their influence diminished as other political figures filled the vacuum left by Caesar's absence. Caesar did not live to see how his reforms, his military campaigns, and his administrative decisions shaped the next generations of Roman governance. He died before the Republic transitioned fully into the imperial system that would emerge under Octavian, who became Augustus. Yet the structures Caesar created remained: the calendar, administrative reforms, provincial reorganization, expanded citizenship infrastructure plans, legal adjustments. These changes continued to guide Roman society long after his death. Julius Caesar's life had been marked more by steady movement than sudden leaps. He rose through routine offices, built alliances with patience, governed provinces with methodical attention, and approached even crises with controlled decision-making. His death was abrupt, but the legacy he left unfolded gradually, shaping the world around him in ways he had not planned or predicted. In the stillness after the Ides of March, Rome began moving toward a new structure, a direction set in motion not by Caesar's final actions, but by the years of calm authority that preceded them. Julius Caesar's life did not unfold as a single dramatic story. It advanced in gradual steps: early hardships, quiet administrative work, steady military experience, carefully built alliances, and a measured rise through the Roman political system. Each phase came with responsibilities that he approached methodically. Even during conflict, his decisions followed patterns of observation, preparation, and restrained action. When his authority expanded, it did so over many years, by appointments, reforms, and tasks completed one after another, not by sudden declarations. And when tensions formed around him, they gathered quietly as well, through concerns voiced in private, hesitations in the Senate, and cautious conversations behind closed doors. His death was abrupt, but the legacy he left behind was not. It developed gradually, as Rome adjusted to the absence of the person who had provided direction during a period of disorder. His reforms remained in place. His administrative structures continued to function. His influence lived on through those who had learned from him or were shaped by the environment he helped create. In time, the Republic gave way to an empire, not through a single event, but through many small transitions, much like the rest of Caesar's life. The systems he built, the leadership he demonstrated, and the stability he introduced quietly influenced the generations that followed. What began as the life of a young Roman navigating modest circumstances became the story of someone whose decisions guided the turning of an entire era. Yet the path from one to the other was never rushed. It moved, as so much of his life did, at a steady, measured pace. And so, the legacy of Julius Caesar remains not only in the major events often retold, but also in the quieter patterns of the life he lived, patterns that shaped Rome long after he was gone.